This is Super Yacht News with E. Sisman.
Hi, welcome back to the channel. So some of the testimony of one of the crew of the Sinking Yacht Bayesian is starting to come out. He and another member of the crew, as well as the captain, are currently under investigation by the Italian authorities to determine whether or not they should be charged with any crimes. Matthew Griffiths, who was described as a sailor in the article by anza.it, which I'm reading from, which is assuming means he's a deckhand. He was on duty on the night the Bayesian sank on August 19th. He says he woke the captain up when the wind was blowing at 20 knots. He ordered to wake everyone up, Griffiths told prosecutors, and the ANZA learned on Saturday. Now, by he, I'm assuming he means the captain, and by everyone, I'm also assuming that he meant the rest of the crew and not the guests, because he wants the crew to muster so they can put stuff away, right? Then the testimony reads, I then stored away the pillows and plants, closed the windows of the sitting room on the bow and some hatches, Griffiths also told investigators. Now, Griffiths, along with the engineer Tim Parker-Eaton and the captain James Cuffield, are all facing criminal charges if importantly, the investigation determines any wrongdoing. So anyway, the article reads that the seaman did not talk about the doors for which he's not responsible, ANZA has learned. That's the news organization in Italy. Now, closing the watertight doors remotely would be done from the bridge, but I would imagine that's something that he would feel uncomfortable doing if he is not qualified. And that's another assumption that I've made, that he's not qualified because he's a deckhand. He's most likely not qualified to do those kinds of things, to work on the bridge. So that's something the captain would most likely do. If there was a qualified officer on the bridge, or a chief officer, I'm sure they would have done it also. Now, Griffiths also told investigators that the ship tilted and we fell into the water. This is remarkable testimony. We were then able to climb back onto the vessel and we tried to rescue those we could, he said. The sailor, during questioning, added that the boat was tilted and we were walking on the walls. We rescued those we could. Also, this is still the testimony of the sailor. He said Cutfield, the captain, rescued the little girl and her mother, he said, referring to two passengers who survived the shipwreck. That's quite an incredible bit of testimony. I can only imagine what that must have been like, you know, remembering that it was in the darkness as well, which hasn't really been mentioned there. Like I said, I'm assuming when he said the captain told him to wake everyone up, that he meant the crew, to muster them to go to work to clear the decks, the exterior decks of the vessel. So even at that point, it seems that the storm in the captain's mind was limited to the necessity to secure the vessel from the storm, which is pretty standard. But also, you don't send people outside to put away cushions and stuff if you feel you're in imminent danger, right? He's telling them to go outside and pick up things, etc. Now, reading between the lines here, I would say that the sailor woke the captain at 20 knots, and he told him to wake everybody up. So he must have left the bridge to go down to wake everybody up, knocking on doors, most likely, as there's no public address system on a vessel of this size. It's not required by class. Also, the report confirmed that there is no black box, as they call it, or VDR, which I said that there probably wouldn't be unless it was added when it wasn't required, because it's not required by class. Then he says he went and cleared away plants and pillows and stuff which was out on deck. So we assume by this the captain is on the bridge, but we don't know, did he wait for the captain to arrive on the bridge before leaving the bridge to do that? Or did the captain tell him on the phone? I assume he woke him up on the phone, and the captain said, okay, go and wake everyone up and go outside and start tidying. And then the captain made his way to the bridge. We don't know the answer to that right now. The most remarkable part of this testimony is the fact that the vessel tilted and put them in the water, and then they climbed back on board the sinking vessel, which is now laying on its side, according to his testimony, right? The boat was tilted and we were walking on the walls, he said. Now, it should also be noted that he said that the captain rescued the little girl and the mother. There are other captains historically who have left the vessel before the vessel had even sunk, right? And left even when there were hundreds of guests on board. So the testimony is based on one person. It's not corroborated by anyone else yet. But assuming this is true, this tells us that at least two of the crew were trying to save people They weren't just thinking of their own safety. Going back to the weather and going back to Mr. Constantino, the CEO of the Italian Sea Group, which is a group of companies in Italy that builds yachts, and including Perini Navi, which is who built Bayesian. He said that the weather was forecasted, and he shows signs of the weather of the storm coming in. It's not as straight cut as that though, because as we said, there are storms and then there are downbursts and water spouts, and there are levels of storms. We even have numbers for them, so it's not just here's a storm, therefore everyone should be mustered with their life jackets on. So Simon Boxall is an oceanographer for the University of Southampton. He was talking about the weather in a recent interview with Nexus, which is a Turkish news organization, I believe. I'm going to play the audio from this video, and I'll put a link below if you want to see the full interview. It's a very interesting article, actually.
If you look at the forecast, what's coming to light at the moment is there was a storm warning, but it was for a 6/7 storm. That's moderate for a vessel this size. It shouldn't cause a problem. And I've worked at sea for many years. 6 or 7, I'd be annoyed because it would stop me working as an oceanographer for a while, but I wouldn't be concerned about my vessel's safety particularly. And the other problem is it's nighttime. And if you work at sea at night, you're very aware that you don't see things coming. In the daytime, you would see the storm approaching and you'd have time to do something about it as it comes from the horizon. At nighttime, particularly with little moon, it's difficult to see what's coming, and it would have hit very suddenly and without any warning.
And let's not forget what the Italian Air Force said about the storm. They said that there was a storm forecast, but it was not expected to be as bad as it was. So anyway, over the last 2 weeks, there's been many questions, and we still don't have the answer to a lot of them. Some of the questions by the media were based on a lack of knowledge of yachting in general, and we've answered quite a number of their questions here on the channel. They were asking about the VDR, if it's been recovered, and we said here that it's most likely they don't have one, and that's been confirmed now. However, we've gathered our own list of questions, and we're going to share them with you now. So over the course of the investigation, we will hopefully get the answers to these questions, and we may even add questions to this list as we go. This is just a list of questions that we've been compiling because we were asking each other questions, and then we thought, let's write them down and see if we can answer them or see if they get answered. So every time we get an answer to one of the questions below, we will bring that to you. Anyway, this is our current list of unanswered questions, which we would hope investigators will be trying to answer. These are the questions that should be getting asked as well. The first question is, why did the boat turn? Now, from the AIS data, we see the vessel apparently turning away from the wind and heading in the other direction, which is very unusual for this kind of weather. The other vessel, the one that rescued them out of the life raft, they turned to the direction of the wind, and you can see them move at the same time, but their vessel is pointed in the other direction, which is what Bayesian should have done. Now, did the boat turn, or is the AIS data incorrect? Now, we've asked this question. We're currently waiting for a reply to this question by Marine Traffic. It could be an issue with AIS. Like I've said in the past, it's not foolproof. And the reason why I say this is because I've been stood in a marina in the past. There's a video on my channel from a few years ago where I filmed Madame Goo docking in Monaco. And this is just an example. I've seen it before in other instances. But the vessel was docking, and to dock, they dock stern to. And when they do it, they actually turn outside of the marina, and then they reverse in, come in stern to, and they dock with the stern against the quayside. And I was watching it on Marine Traffic, and on Marine Traffic, it showed the vessel going forwards, even though it was reversing, and I could see the vessel reversing. So I asked Marine Traffic to clarify, is that a mistake? How could that happen? Well, AIS is a compilation of data from the vessel. It's connected. The AIS system is connected to various things on board, gyro compass, which gives heading, GPS, amongst some other things as well. But there are a number of different devices on board. The AIS doesn't have all this data itself. It's given the data by the onboard systems, and that's broadcast, on VHF. So it could be that the vessel was going backwards, but it looks like it's going forwards. So we're waiting to get an answer on that anyway. Did they lose their anchor? This is another question. If the vessel did turn, if that turns out that it is correct, that the vessel turned, it could be because they lost their anchor. And what I mean by lost their anchor, I mean if the anchor chain snapped, or they probably dragged their anchor. I think the other vessel said that they dragged their anchor. If they lost their anchor, then that would explain the vessel was drifting. Was the general emergency alarm sounded? The general emergency signal is 7 short and 1 long blast of the ship's horn. This would also have been sounded throughout the entire vessel on loudspeakers, so everybody would hear that noise on the system. Now, if they did sound the 7 short and 1 long, which is the general emergency alert, would the guests know what it meant? Now, this is going back to what I've been saying in previous videos, that generally, and in my experience and in the experience of everybody who I've asked since this accident happened, guests don't do boat drills. So do they know what 7 short and 1 long means? Did the skipper make it to the bridge? This is the next question. Was the engineer in the engine room starting engines? Now, if the skipper made it to the bridge, he would have called the engineer and asked him to start the engines. Now, on a small vessel like this, it's probable that the captain could start the engines from the bridge himself. If they were ready to be started, sometimes the systems might not be ready to be started, and then the engineer would have to do it. So there's two questions there. Did the captain make it to the bridge, and did they call the engineer, and did the engineer go to the engine room, and did they start the engines? Why would they start the engines in a storm? Assuming the captain saw the storm as being severe enough to worry about it, then they would raise the anchor, turn the vessel towards the wind to prevent it from being hit beam on or side on, which sounds like what actually happened is they were hit side on, and that's why they went over on the side. Now, if they lost their anchor, started to drift, the boat turns beam on, and then the wind hits it and knocks it over. That's a theory. Next question is, did he close the watertight doors from the bridge? Now, this is the big question, because had the watertight doors been closed, in theory, it could have prevented at least the speed of the vessel sinking. But as we know, the downflood angle, which we've mentioned in a previous video, which talks about vents on the vessel, which is for engine extraction, air being taken in by the engines, by the HVAC, the air conditioning systems, they would have been in the open position, which could have caused flooding, and the watertight doors, position of the watertight doors would have become less relevant, or that wouldn't prevent necessarily the vessel from sinking. But however, the question remains, did he close the watertight doors? Anyway, hopefully we're going to get the answers to these questions at some point. As soon as we do, we'll bring them to you. So anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your weekend, and be sure to stay tuned for further updates. Subscribe if you haven't already. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.